Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitiam et insidias diaboli est oppressium. Imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo. Divina virtute in infernum detrude. Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitiam et insidias diaboli est oppressium. Imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo. Divina virtute in infernum Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitiam et insidias diaboli est oppressirium. Imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo. Divina virtute in infernum Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitiam et insidias diaboli est oppressirium. Imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitia et insidias diaboli est oppressirium. Imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo. Divina virtute in infernum Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitia et insidias diaboli est oppressirium. Imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo. Divina virtute in infernum
Hello, everyone. And as always, it's great to be here. This chat business is really good because I really feel like like you're there. I'm not just talking into a webcam or something. So thanks for that. Anyway, when I started to set up to do a show on Edith Stein, I realized that, as fast as I like to talk as a New York Jew, there's no way that within, 3 hours I could say everything I wanted to say about Edith Stein in both her life and also her contributions, her writings, and her philosophy and her spirituality. So, as you know, I divided into 2 shows. And the last show, if you haven't seen the last show, I'm going to assume that everyone has seen it. So if you haven't and you're watching the recording, you might want to start with the last show because I don't want to go again through her conversion. But I want to start, I'm going to back up to the point of her conversion, basically, and move on from there because I gave it very short shrift last time. And there's a lot in her writing and stuff that would be good to put in the context of her entering Carmel and so forth. So anyway, I'll kind of like very, very quickly just jump back to essentially 1921. Edith Stein had a couple of experiences that led to her entry into the Catholic Church, including getting to know very serious, fervent Catholics, including a lot of Jewish convert Catholics, by the way, like the Reinachs and the Max Scheler and so forth. And she had that experience visiting the widow of Reinach, the Anna Reinach, after her husband died, and being very impressed by the very deeply grieving widow's interior peace and recollection, even though she had just lost her young, much beloved new husband in the trenches of Flanders, I think, in the trenches of World War I. And as Edith Stein later wrote, quote, "This was my first encounter with the cross and the divine power it imparts to those who bear it. It was the moment when my unbelief collapsed and Christ began to shine his light on me, Christ in the mystery of the cross." Okay, so that is I don't want to say step 1. It's kind of step 2, but I won't go back to step 1. And then finally, in the summer of 1921, she was staying in the country house of another phenomenologist, philosopher, colleague of hers. And she was left alone one evening, and she was wandering around the library of the house, and she picked up St. Teresa of Avila's life, autobiography. And she read it through the night, and the next morning she said, "This is truth." And she immediately catechized herself, essentially. She got a catechism, she got a breviary and a missal, and she studied it, and she went to the local parish priest and said she wanted to be baptized. And he said, "Oh, who's been instructing you? How long have you been following instruction?" and so forth. And with this beautiful Jewish chutzpah, if you know the word chutzpah, all she said was, "Test my knowledge." And he quizzed her, and he asked her questions. And his response was, he wrote to another priest friend of his saying, "Yosef, I have here a convert who is far superior to me and puts me to shame with her theological knowledge." So essentially, he agreed to baptize her almost immediately. She was baptized in a little village parish church near the country house of her friend whose house she was staying at when she read St. Teresa of Avila's life. Here's a picture of her. Her name was Hedwig Martius. And then, as I said, Edith Stein was baptized in the church in that village. And here is that church, which today it's obviously rebuilt, looks like it's a rebuilt church. And there is a monument to Edith Stein there. And here is the picture of the priest who baptized her. I know it's only been like another 60 seconds and I'll be past what I talked about last time. Here's the priest who baptized her. And let me see if I have his name handy. his name was Eugen Breitling. And then finally, the day that she chose for her baptism was January 1st. She was reading the St. Teresa of Avila's life. It was in the summer of 1921, and so by January 1st of the next year of 1922, she was baptized, January 1st having been, in those days, the feast of the circumcision of Jesus. And as I pointed out last time, a very, 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 very beautiful feast day to choose for a Jew entering the church, because, of course, it was the circumcision was the ritual event, the sacrament, actually, that through which Jesus entered the Jewish people. So on the feast day that celebrates Jesus' entry into the Jewish people, into the Jewish church, so to speak, Edith Stein chose for her baptism, which of course is what has replaced circumcision and is the sacrament of entry into the new Judaism, the Catholic Church, the fulfilled version of Judaism. So it was very poetical. So, okay, I don't know if I'm talking too loud or too fast. I just turned down the mic because I think I was a little bit on the loud side. I'll keep a little half an eye from time to time on the chat stream. So let me know if I'm screaming in your ear or if I'm inaudible or something. So anyway, and now I'll go to Edith Stein's writings, which is nominally the difference between this show and the last show. First of all, when I'm at the point of her entering the Catholic Church, right? She wrote later, I'll just read what she wrote. I had given up practicing my Jewish religion when I was a 14-year-old girl and did not begin to feel Jewish again until I had returned to God. Essentially, enter the Catholic Church. And I'm not here to advertise books. I'm not even sure if I have one easily reachable. But I have put together a book called Honey from the Rock, 16 Jews Find the Sweetness of Christ. It's got Jewish to Catholic witness testimonies. Every single one of us in the book, I'm one of the testimonies in the book, feel 100 times more Jewish since we've entered the Catholic Church than we possibly could ever have felt before we entered the Catholic Church. And that includes very serious Jews as well as more contemporary Jews like me. Judaism, I don't want to offend anybody, okay? But Judaism in a fundamental way doesn't make sense. It doesn't have consistency and integrity anymore, except through the lens of the Catholic Church. In other words, except when you see it being complete in the Catholic Church, because Judaism was all about the promise of sending the Messiah. That's the point of the Jews. When Abraham offered his son Isaac as a sacrifice, and in return, God said, because you have done this and have not withheld your only beloved son from me, your descendants will be as numerous as the sand on the seashore and the stars in the sky, and through your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. That's a promise to send the Messiah through his seed. Abraham was the first Jew. Judaism was all about that, was all about sending the Messiah. Now, in the corpus of the Old Testament, it's clear that the Messiah has to come when there's still a temple in Jerusalem, among other things, because the Messiah has to be from the house of David, and there's no way to know whether someone's from the house of David after the destruction of the temple, because that's where all of the genealogical records were kept. So Jews basically, in honesty, and some of them have become Catholic as a result, I'm thinking of the Lehman brothers, Jews are sort of aware that the time for the promised Messiah to come has passed in the absence of the temple. So that's one reason why Judaism in some sense doesn't hold water. And a more important reason is that the Jews are the chosen people. Growing up Jewish, I always knew that I was one of the chosen people. We're always told over and over and again, you're the chosen people. What are you chosen for? Well, it's clear. Well, the Old Testament talks about the Messiah coming through the Jews, but the extension of that is that all of the nations of the earth will be blessed through the Jewish people, that the Jewish people will somehow inaugurate the kingdom of heaven on earth. Now, we know that happened when Jesus came, right? He said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That was the promise of Judaism, was to bring heaven down to earth, which it did in bringing the Messiah and the sacraments of the Catholic Church through Jesus, right? So that's what they were chosen for. And they fulfilled that, okay? So Jews know, even today, they kind of know in their hearts they're supposed to save the world. And so, how are they going to do that? How are they going to do that? The only way they could do that is, first of all, if the Messiah hasn't come and they're going to bring the Messiah. But most Jews don't believe in that because the time of the Messiah has come and gone. So you get all of this Meshuggah Jewish impulse to save the world expressed in destructive mechanisms, okay? Marxism was of course Jewish. He was atheist Jew. He wasn't a good Jew. I think his father or grandfather was a good Jew. But in any case, Marxism was an attempt to basically bring the kingdom of heaven on earth through communal ownership and this horrible forced system that enslaved tens of millions of people for decades and decades and decades, and is still doing so in our friends in Wuhan. And or you have Freud, right, who's going to bring happiness to all of mankind through understanding that, every man really wants to marry his mother or whatever was going on. So you have all of this misguided messianic impulse in Jews to save the world, and in the absence of knowing that what it was about was bringing Jesus to earth, it gets channeled into all of these horrible mechanisms. Anyway, that's digression number one. It didn't take me long today, just about 5 minutes to go into my first digression. But anyway, that was all by way of saying, yes, all of us Jews who enter the Catholic Church can feel Jewish in integrity for the first time, okay? Because trying to feel Jewish as a good Jew requires a kind of suspension of disbelief, a kind of a schizophrenia where you have to compartmentalize, different aspects of your understanding because they actually don't fit together. When you enter the Catholic Church for the first time, they really fit together. They fit together, like a jigsaw puzzle or something, or like a dovetailed joint. They fit together perfectly, everything. So there you have it. So Edith Stein expressed the same thing, that she began to feel Jewish again when she refound God in the Catholic Church. Okay. Then she still would go to synagogue with her mother, who was still a pious Jewish woman. And her mother commented, this is after Edith Stein became Catholic, "Never have I seen anyone pray as Edith did." So even in the eyes of this Catholic woman who was very distraught at her daughter's conversion to the Catholic Church, she had to acknowledge the depth and intensity and reality of Edith Stein's prayer. Now, from the earliest days, Edith Stein saw, of course, the prefigurement of Judaism. Let me rephrase that. The prefigurement of the Catholic Church in Judaism. The foreshadowing of the Catholic Church in Judaism. And this is a little bit of a lengthy quote, so bear with me. And it's a little bit deep. But I want to continue with this quote. "Some understanding of the Eucharistic character of prayer." Needless to say, Edith Stein was in some sense all about the Eucharist, as I hope all of us Catholics are in a sense. "Some understanding of the Eucharistic character of prayer had already been revealed under the Old Covenant. The wondrous form of the tent of meeting, erected as it was according to divine specifications, was considered an image of the entire creation assembled in worship and service around its Lord. It was thought of as a home below, as opposed to a higher home. O Lord, I love the house where you dwell, the place where your glory abides, sing the psalmist, because the tent of meeting is, quote, valued as much as the creation of the world. As the heavens in the creation story were stretched out like a carpet, so carpets were to be the walls of the tent. As the waters of the earth were separated from the waters of the heavens, so the curtain separated the Holy of Holies from the outer rooms. The bronze sea, you can read about that in the Old Testament, that was to be in Solomon's temple, is modeled after the sea that is contained by its shores. The seven-branched light, the candelabrum, the menorah, we tend to think of it as, in the tent stands for the heavenly lights. Lambs and birds that were offered for sacrifice stand for the swarms of life teeming in the water, on the earth, and in the air. And as the earth is handed over to people, so in the sanctuary there stands the high priest, purified to act and serve before God. Moses blessed, anointed, and sanctified the completed house, as the Lord blessed and sanctified the work of his hands on the seventh day. The Lord's house was to be a witness of God on earth, just as heaven and earth are witnesses to him. So, this may be beyond me actually to do, but Edith Stein is kind of painting this picture in the tabernacle, in every Catholic church. In a sense, we have all of creation. We have the creator of all of creation. We have Jesus. And already the Jewish temple, Solomon's temple, and before that the tent of meeting, were to be prefigurements of all of creation kind of compressed into this space, which is why there was the bronze sea, which represented the separation of the waters from the earth in the creation story, the seven-branched candelabrum, the menorah, which represented the lights of heaven, and so forth. All of creation was encapsulated, in a sense, symbolically, in the tent of meeting and in the Jewish temple, which then in itself was a prefigurement of the Eucharistic character of prayer, where we have, the creator of all of creation in our true tabernacles, let's say, in the Catholic Church. Okay. She enters the church January 1st, 1922. If she had her druthers, she would immediately become a Carmelite and just become a religious to live in the presence of God and pray in the presence of God and not have any distraction from that. However, her spiritual director suggested that she still had work to do in the world. And she also didn't want to kill her mother, actually. It was bad enough she became Catholic. Oy vey, she should also become a nun and also lose all contact. Digression number 2. I'm 18 minutes into the show. Do I get to make a second digression? True story. I think I mentioned this in the show on the Carthusians. The first prior of the only Carthusian monastery in the United States, his name was Raphael Diamond. It was Father Raphael. His secular name was actually Neil Diamond, but he took the religious name Father Raphael. So he was Father Raphael Diamond. He passed away maybe about 15 years ago. I had some contact with him. So he grew up, let's say, we're talking about the 1940s, essentially, maybe the early 50s. And he's in New York City. He is I believe he was a graduate student at Columbia University at the time. I may have that a little bit off. And he's Jewish. He's Jewish. Very much Jewish. And he falls in love. Anyway, he gets introduced to the Catholic faith, in part through the von Hildebrands, but that's another story. And he is convinced of the truth of the Catholic faith. So So at some point, he enters the Catholic Church and he tells his parents. And you can just think of his Jewish mother, right, in some apartment in New York City. She's tearing her hair out. He tells her, she says, "Oh, oy vey, oh my gosh, how can this be? This is the worst thing in the world. Our beloved son, you had, all our hope was in you. You were brilliant, graduate student. You knew so much, and you want to enter the Catholic Church Why would you do something so stupid? Why would you do that to us? This is the worst thing that could ever happen to us. This is the worst thing in the world. Okay, pretty bad. Then, sometime later, he receives the call to become a Carthusian monk. So then he tells his parents, I'm going to enter the Carthusian monastery. Now, then his parents' reaction is, oh my God, I thought nothing could be worse. Nothing could be worse than you becoming a Catholic. But this is 100 times worse, 1,000,000 times worse. Not only have you become a Catholic, but you're going to lock yourself up for the rest of your life and waste the rest of your life, in a cell in a monastery and just bury yourself alive. And we thought nothing could be worse than you becoming a Catholic, but boy, we didn't know this is 1,000,000 times worse. Okay, so that's really terrible. So he enters the Carthusians in Vermont. He's there for a while, probably a good long while, and elections come up, and he's elected prior. So then he tells his Jewish parents, or writes his Jewish parents, they've made me prior of the monastery. What's their reaction? Oh, well, now it's okay. At least our son made a success of himself. So anyway, digression number 2. So anyway, Edith Stein immediately wanted to join the Carmelites, but it would have killed her mother, and also her spiritual director advised against it. So she wanted to pursue her academic career. She had a doctorate in philosophy by then. She could not get a teaching position for 2 reasons: prejudice against her as a woman and prejudice against her as Jewish. She couldn't get a university position, so she settled for a high school, essentially, a boarding school, convent school, that was actually a teacher training college. Teacher training high school, I should say. Things were a little bit different in those days. And run by Dominicans in Speyer. And she spent a good long time there. She spent from 1922 to 1931 there, 1923 to 1931 there, as essentially a high school teacher. But in a convent. And she entered into the life of the sisters. In other words, she joined them in their offices and so forth. So let me show some pictures of that. The convent is still around in Speyer. There's the convent church building from the outside. I know I showed these last time, so I'm racing through. There is the beautiful chapel. You can see the Dominican nuns there. You know how you can tell they're Dominican is because they have the black veil and the white habit. And here's a picture of her in those days as the high school teacher. She would have been in her 30s by then. And here is a picture of her on like a picnic with some of her students. I know she looks a little severe. She was very no-nonsense, but of course very loving. And anyway, so then that's what she's doing in those days. And so she took that position in 1923. And she was also, because she had a doctorate in philosophy, doing some philosophical work, writing some articles and doing some translation. She did some translation of Thomas Aquinas. She did some translation of Cardinal Newman, in fact. She learned English in order to translate Cardinal Newman into German. And these writings and translations started being known, and she started being asked to speak on the circuit, so to speak, invited to present papers and to speak to conferences. So beginning in 1927, began this kind of speaking career alongside her teaching career. I'll go back to a main picture of me here. And she became very popular, and she gave a lot of talks and lectures. I don't want to say all over the world, but all over the immediate area of Germany and Austria. She spoke in Heidelberg, she spoke in Zurich, that's Switzerland, she spoke in Salzburg, that's Austria, and so forth. And her, over time, her central area became the role of women, the unique gift of women. Early feminism, you could say, but a very Catholic feminism, a very kosher feminism, if I can say so, on the unique gifts of women. Now, you may remember that her doctoral dissertation, way back when, was on empathy. What is empathy? I need my wife here to explain. I'm not sure I can. It's a little bit like sympathy, but it isn't sympathy. But it's feeling into the other person. It is, is feeling with the other person It is entering into their feelings and empathizing with them. I'm trying to say sympathizing with them, but I may be distorting things a little bit if I use the word sympathy. But it is a joining of your heart with the other person and letting what's in their heart sort of flow into yours, and perhaps letting what's in your heart flow into them. Dare I say, it's a gift of women. It's a more characteristically feminine gift than masculine gift, okay? I don't want to offend anyone, but women care a lot more about feelings than most men do, Anyway, and never mind. I'll leave this in Edith Stein's words because she talks about it. I don't want to offend anybody, but it was certainly very helpful to me when I read books like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and stuff like that, because I know that in my own courtship and marriage with my wife, I came into it very uncatechized in the difference between men and women, and it's very good to know more about the other. The classic example that's in that book is that men want to fix things, right? Something's broken, you want to fix it. That's my favorite hobby, is fixing things. I'm happy when my car breaks if it's something I can fix myself. And so, your wife comes to you distraught about something because, I don't know, because her boss gave her a bad review or something. I don't know what. And what do you want to do as the husband? You want to fix it. It's like, okay, what can we do about this? Where can we appeal it? Who can we yell at? Whatever. And eventually, the wife wants to get through to the husband. That is not about fixing it. She wants him to understand how she feels. She wants him to enter into her feelings about it. And that's what she's coming to him for, not for him to find the solution. This is a classic problem, right? The guys want to find the solution. The women want to share their feelings. Have I offended anyone yet? I'll find out on the chat. So anyway, the fact that the unique gifts of women was her field is not unrelated to the fact that empathy was her doctoral topic. In fact, it's a continuation of the fact that empathy was her doctoral topic. Okay, so let me read something from her writings. That's what the show was supposed to be about women, the role of women. Before I do so, I think I have a picture of the book here. Okay, there are lots of books on Edith Stein. What I'm reading is from the book that you see on the left of your screen, Edith Stein, Women. And it's full of essays that she wrote during this period on the role of women. And I put on the right side of the screen, somebody asked me about biographies. This is my favorite biography of Edith Stein, by Waltraud Herbstrith, who is actually a Carmelite, I believe in Cologne, in the monastery where Edith Stein was, the convent. And it's good. It's got the reason I like it a lot is actually because it is totally peppered with quotes from Edith Stein's writings. It's not some academic pontificating about Edith Stein. It's more cut and paste of what Edith Stein herself said at various points in time. That's my favorite one of it. All contemporary biographies, probably all biographies of Edith Stein, suffer a little bit from political correctness. But this one is certainly no worse than, it's better than any other that I know of. So anyway, so what I'm reading is from the book on the left, though. It's from Women. Okay, here we go. I don't want to offend anybody, but let me know. That's the beauty of this chat stream if I offend you. Of course, if you're watching the recording, you can still put it in the comments. By the way, I read all comments. I get them in my email, by the way, so I don't have to go to YouTube to read them. They send them to me as emails. I do read them all. I don't have time to respond to all of them, and many of them are comments, and they're not actually asking for a response. But I'm very grateful to them. And when there is a need expressed in them, I think I am pretty diligent in responding to them. Okay, women. Are we able to speak of vocations which are specifically feminine, To begin with, we must ask, is there a natural feminine vocation of woman? What spiritual attitude does it demand? Only the person blinded by the passion of controversy could deny that woman in soul and body is formed for a particular purpose. Now, don't get indignant, because she's not saying what you might jump to the conclusion she's saying. Okay. Only the person blind could deny that woman in soul and body is formed for a particular person. The clear and irrevocable word of Scripture declares what daily experience teaches from the beginning of the world. Woman is destined to be wife and mother. Both physically and spiritually, she is endowed for this purpose. Of course, women share a basic human nature, but basically her faculties are different from men. Therefore, a different type of soul must exist as well. Okay, so this is not, and Edith Stein goes on to say that women can excel at, every possible vocation and profession. So she's not saying women should be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen all the time. But what she is saying is that there's a basic human nature that's shared by men and women. On top of that, there is a gender-specific nature, let's say, to a greater or lesser extent. Okay, I mean, some men don't have much masculinity and some women don't have much femininity. That's absolutely fine. But that doesn't mean there isn't a characteristic feminine nature and masculine nature. Now, the feminine nature, that's characteristically feminine, comes about in large part because the particular role of women has to do with bearing children and being a wife and a mother. So the things that women have different from men are going to be flowing from that difference in their core vocation, in a sense. It's not every woman's vocation, of course, whatever you're going to call it. Their core, their specific destiny. Usually, just like men, men have to be the protectors. Men have to ward off the enemies. Men have to ward off the wild animals and build houses and take care of the physical needs of the wife and the children. So, yeah, they have to be stronger. They have to be more aggressive. They want to fix things, whatever. So this isn't saying universally that all men have to be like that and all women have to be like the other. It's just saying, come on, it's obvious that there are differences in this core vocation of men and women, being basically father, protector, provider versus being mother and nurturer. And it's going to be reflected in characteristic strengths and weaknesses. And therefore, Edith Stein is saying there are also going to be differences in the souls. Anyway, as she says, a different type of soul must exist as well. Continuing. Women naturally seek to embrace that which is living, personal, and whole. To cherish, guard, protect, nourish, and advance growth is her natural maternal yearning. Lifeless matter, the fact, can hold primary interest for her only insofar as it serves the living and the personal, not ordinarily for its own sake. The living and personal to which her care extends is a concrete whole and is protected and encouraged as a totality. This does not mean that one part is sacrificed to another, nor the mind to the body or one spiritual faculty at the expense of the others. She aspires to this totality in herself and in others. Her theoretical and her practical views correspond. Her natural line of thought is not as much conceptual and analytical as it is directed intuitively and emotionally to the concrete. This natural endowment enables women to guard and teach her children, but this basic attitude is not intended just for them. She tends to behave in this way to all those in contact with her. Man, on the other hand, is consumed by his enterprise, and he expects others to be interested and helpful. Generally, it is difficult for him to become involved in other persons and their concerns. Maybe I'm the only guy out there who isn't nearly as interested in other persons and their concerns as my wife is. We'll visit another couple or something. And, 2 years later, she'll remember what the wife was upset about. And I will remember what was wrong with the guy's car. Okay? I mean, maybe I'm the only one like that, but I don't think so. It's more natural for women to be concerned, as Edith Stein says, in other people and their concerns. It is natural for women that she has the faculty to interest herself empathetically. There you have that word. Enter into the feelings of the other. This endowment is bound closely to her maternal gift. An active sympathy for those who fall within her ken awakens them and heightens their achievements. It is a concerned, formative, and truly maternal function, precisely one which even the adult needs. This function will come into play also with one's own children. My wife just visited her sister, who has 3 small children. And I am in awe that when the 3-year-old little boy runs up to my wife and wants to show off, essentially, show off something, show how he can do something, or show off his truck, or show off how high he can jump, or something like that, my wife really responds. She responds with interest. She responds with admiration. She responds exactly as that little boy is dying to have someone respond. I am incapable of that. But that response is tremendously, tremendously valuable for the emotional development and growth and sanity and self-esteem and wholeness of that child. It's actually needed. I think this is what Edith Stein is talking about. Okay. Now, we proceed to the second basic question. Are there feminine vocations other than the natural one, that is, of being wife and mother? Only delusion could deny that women are capable of practicing vocations other than that of spouse and mother. There is no profession which cannot be practiced by a woman. A self-sacrificing woman can accomplish astounding achievements, but also her individual gifts and tendencies can lead to the most diversified activities. No woman is only woman. Like a man, each has her individual specialty and talent, and this talent gives her the capability of doing professional work, be it artistic, scientific, technical, etc. Essentially, the individual talent can enable her to embark on any discipline, even those remote from the usual feminine vocations. In such instances, one would not speak of a feminine vocation. Even those professions whose objective requirements are not harmonious with feminine nature, those termed as specifically masculine could yet be practiced in an authentically feminine way. In most instances, the work is conducted with other people, and with it, an immediate opportunity is given for the development of all feminine virtues. The development of the feminine nature can be a blessed counterbalance precisely where everyone is in danger of becoming mechanized and losing his humanity. Thus, the participation of women in the most diverse professional disciplines can be a blessing for the entire society, precisely if the specifically feminine ethos is preserved. Okay, so I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'm tempted to say she says it all here. There are these characteristic strengths of women, but being woman is not the entirety of the person. She also has her individual talents and so forth. Perhaps to be a mathematician, perhaps to whatever Madame Curie was, to be a chemist or whatever. It doesn't negate her specific talents. Yet, her specific feminine nature can in fact be a blessing even in particularly masculine professions. Because in fact, pretty much wherever you work, you're involved with other people. And therefore, the specific gifts of women, to be understanding, to be empathetic, to understand the feelings of others, to respond to needs as they show up and so forth, are incredibly valuable everywhere, including in specifically masculine settings. Perhaps they're even more needed there, because otherwise all you have is men who aren't going to be providing those I don't want to say resources. They aren't going to be, fructifying the environment in that way. I will stop there with this. Then she will be like a good. Well, no, I'll just stop there to just give a flavor, and I will kind of remind you that this is now 1927, let's say. This was pretty radical then. I mean, that this if you look at it through 2020 eyes, not 2020 vision, but 1920 eyes, this may seem kind of male chauvinist or something, or anti-feminist. But if you look at it through 1927 eyes, it's extremely feminist. And anyway. Okay, moving on. Let me just see if anyone is shooting me yet. Probably not. Okay, so that's what she was doing until 1933. And in 1933, she was forced out of teaching, even in this convent women's high school, because she was Jewish. Hitler came to power January 30th, 1933, and immediately put in all these laws restricting the acceptable activities of Jews, including teaching. So she could no longer be a teacher. So, yippee, now she can join Carmel. So she immediately is free to join Carmel. She enters Carmel in 1933. I'll read a short quote from her in 1933. I had heard even before this, of these new rules by Hitler. I had heard even before this of different measures being taken against Jews. But now, all of a sudden, I realized that God had once more laid a heavy hand upon his people, my people. She didn't feel any less Jewish because she was a Catholic, right? His people, my people. As a matter of fact, the entire story of her martyrdom, I'll get to that, is that she was carrying the cross of Christ on behalf of all of her fellow Jews who didn't know enough. So then anyway, she's finally free to join Carmel. She enters in 1933 and takes the habit on April 15th, 1934. Let me show you some nice pictures here. She entered the convent of of Cologne. She entered the Carmel convent in Cologne. Cologne is a city in Germany. And here's a picture of the convent, obviously today. I don't think that building predates World War II. And that iron statue in front, that you see, copper probably actually, is of Edith Stein. All three figures there are of Edith Stein at different stages of her life. Edith Stein is, of course, the resident celebrity of the convent, so to speak. And whoops, that's not the picture I wanted to bring up. This is the picture I want to bring up. You can see here a close-up of two of those statues. Here on the left is Edith Stein as a young Jewish woman carrying the Star of David rather than the cross. Actually, her whole body is as though she's carrying the cross, right? But it's the Star of David, the symbol of Judaism, of course. And then the other pictures of another one of the three statues of her as a Carmelite nun, in this case, really carrying the cross. That is, carrying the cross of Christ. And let me see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. So let's see if that works. I think it probably will work here. There we go. So you can see there, that's very beautiful, actually, her face. And then you see, actually, it looks like only the corpus of Christ. His arms stretched out and his head expired with the crown of thorns. So that is the Carmel that she entered. And here's a picture of her in her wedding gown on the day of her profession. It is, of course, a mystical marriage. And a few years later, her sister Rosa, I'll get to there, Rosa joined her in the convent. So here you have a picture of her sister Rosa. She was 8 years older than Edith Stein, if I remember correctly, in the convent. Rosa never, I don't know what the right word is, never became a nun, actually, is the right word. She was like a lay woman, I believe, who in the convent performing the duties of an extern. And there you have Edith Stein as a fully habited, professed Carmelite. But now let me go back in time a little bit to when Edith Stein entered that Carmel. She took the name, when she entered, of Teresa Benedicta a Croce. I think we all know her religious name is Teresa Benedicta. Usually it's said of the cross. But she didn't mean it as of the cross. She meant it as by the cross. And here's a quote of hers. When I entered, I had already chosen the religious name I wanted, and I received it exactly as I had asked for it, by the cross. By the cross I saw as referring to the fate of God's people, which even at that time began to reveal itself. Anyone who recognized that this was the cross of Christ had a responsibility to bear it in the name of all. Okay? Now remember, her name was Teresa Benedicta, by the cross. What's Benedicta mean? It means blessed. So she took the name Teresa, that was her proper name, blessed by the cross. Blessed by the cross. The cross is a blessing. The heavier the cross, the greater the blessing it is. That's bad news, right, for all of us Catholics. It's actually good news, it's bad news, it's both at once. The more God loves you, the more blessed you are, the heavier the cross. That's, I think, why the Jews have such a heavy cross. It's because they still have some of the blessing of being Jews. It's certainly why the saints have such heavy crosses. Teresa, blessed by the cross. And when she took this name, and when she entered Carmel, she already understood that what was happening to the Jewish people, the beginning of the Holocaust, which turned into the fullness of the Holocaust, was the cross of Christ falling on them. And that those who recognized this had a responsibility to bear it in the name of all. Because the Jews who were not Catholic and didn't know this could not unite their suffering to the suffering of Christ on the cross. However, the Catholic Jews could unite their suffering to the suffering of Christ on the cross. And not only could they unite their suffering with the suffering of Christ on the cross, but they could try to unite the suffering of all the other Jews with the suffering of Christ on the cross, and thereby bring it to its full salvific value, its full redemptive value. Capiche? So that is the importance of that quote of hers. Anyone who recognized that this was the cross of Christ had a responsibility to bear it in the name of all. Okay, so she took her simple vows Easter Sunday, 1935. Her mother died the following year, 1936, which enabled her sister Rosa to enter the convent, because it was bad enough that Edith had become a Catholic. That winter, that enabled Rosa to enter the church, So after her mother died, her older sister, who wanted to be Catholic and knew the truth of Catholicism, was waiting until her mother died before becoming baptized, because it would have killed her mother, basically, is what she thought. So it freed her to enter the church. So that brings us to Edith Stein's life at Carmel. More writings, more quotes. I'm going to give me a moment to look at the chats, though. Okay. On some comments of hers on life in Carmel. This was a life that was absolutely transformed by love of God, down to the last detail. I simply cannot imagine anything greater. Best of all, the spirit of Carmel is love, and that spirit is very much alive in our community. It's true. It's true. Nothing is harder than religious life, but nothing is better than religious life if it's lived properly. I'm going to do a show eventually on St. Faustina, and I'll be talking about that. But objectively speaking, other things being equal, other things are never equal because we're all individuals with individual vocations. But other things being equal, it would be better to be a religious and a priest if you're a male. Maybe not a priest, but a religious, than to be a layman or a laywoman, objectively speaking. However, you better be called for it. In other words, it better be what you're made for. And if it's not what you're made for, there's nothing worse because you'll probably end up in hell. I think I mentioned this to you. Early in my conversion, not that early, for years, for a decade, I was flirting with religious life. I was flirting with religious communities. I was unmarried. I was flirting with becoming a priest, a diocesan priest, a religious priest. And eventually, Jesus got through to me. And I learned through prayer, let's say, that if I became a priest, I'd be going south instead of north. I would end up in hell. And I actually had an experience. I had just a little experience of my place in hell. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, there you have it. And we see that all around us. Am I allowed to say that? Not all of the crisis in the church, but some of the crisis in the church comes from the fact that a lot of men want to become priests for the wrong reason. And if they're not called by God to be priests, they're not going to live up. This is my theory, okay? I have a friend who's a priest who disagrees. But it's going to be very hard to live up to the responsibilities of being a priest if that wasn't God's plan for you. It's not something you can fake, okay? I mean, I could fake... I could probably fake being a truck driver, right? Even if it's not my vocation. Or I could probably fake being a carpenter if it's not my vocation. But I couldn't fake being a nuclear physicist or a theoretical mathematician. If you're not made for that, you're not going to carry it off. And, okay, that's an intellectual challenge. That's not a, moral challenge. But being a priest is a moral challenge. And if you're not made for it, it's unlikely you're going to pull it off. And I've mentioned this before, but in that wonderful exorcism of Annalisa Michel, which was made in the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose, one of the possessing spirits who's forced to say why he was condemned to hell, he's forced to say by the exorcist, was a priest. I think his name was Fleischmann. And when he's in hell. And when the exorcist forces him to say, why was he condemned to hell? His answer is essentially that he fulfilled his duties with such negligence, his priestly duties with such negligence. You're really on very thin ice if you try to be a religious, if that's not God's plan for you. If you try to be a priest, if that's not God's plan for you. So saying that other things being equal, it's superior, doesn't mean that for you or for me it's superior. Because as my spiritual director used to tell me during those 10 years when I was dying to enter religious life, he used to tell me, the point is to enter eternal life, not religious life. Right? The point is entering eternal life, not religious life. Okay, bronze statues. Absolutely. Sorry about that. Showing my ignorance. So anyway, however, the downside of religious life comes across in this next quote of hers. It is easier to be nailed to the cross with a Savior than to become an obedient child with him. In other words, any physical suffering is easier to take than the full requirement of religious obedience, is more painful than any physical deprivation or suffering. Okay, now, she also writes very, very beautifully. Let me see how I'm doing with time. I'll survive. I think this will be a 2-hour show, probably. She writes very beautifully about her interior life, which is actually, I'm tempted to say, simply the life of prayer that is the ideal in Carmel, in a contemplative religious community. Okay, first of all, you know that contemplative religious get a bad rap sometimes. They're condemned sometimes by secular authorities and by secular people as being parasites or not doing anything of value. As a matter of fact, in Germany at one point, is that true? I believe that they were outlawed or expelled in Germany. I might be wrong about that. They definitely were in France, and they definitely were in England. And in France, the working orders were permitted if they did something that was useful for society, like teaching in schools, whereas the contemplative orders were considered total parasites and were not allowed to exist. You see that movement. I wasn't planning on this. I don't have the history at my fingertips. But in many places and many times, active religious were tolerated when contemplative religious were not, because they were condemned as parasites. So let's see what Edith Stein has to say about that. In the silence of the Trinity's inner life, the plan of our redemption was formed. In the concealment of Nazareth, the power of the Holy Spirit came down upon the Virgin in her solitary prayer. Gathered around the Virgin in her solitary prayer, the Church awaited the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Saul, in his solitary prayer during the night of blindness God had cast over his eyes, received the answer to his question, "Lord, what would you have me do?" Peter, in solitary prayer, was made ready for his Gentile mission. So it has remained through all the centuries. Okay? So the biggest event in human history, of course, was the Incarnation, came about when the recipient was in solitary prayer. And these events transformed the world. The Incarnation transformed the world. The descent of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, which took place with people in solitary prayer, right? The apostles gathered around the Blessed Virgin Mary, transformed the world. And St. Peter, receiving his mission to the Gentiles, transformed the world. How did St. Teresa, who did nothing for decades but pray in a convent cell, accomplish what she did? Precisely by leading a life of prayer, by allowing herself to be drawn more and more deeply into the interior castle until she reached the hidden chamber where the Lord could speak to her. The mystical current flowing down the centuries is not a divergent stream that has somehow been separated from the Church's life of prayer. On the contrary, it is its innermost life. Without it, there would be neither liturgy nor church. So this stream of mystical prayer, of contemplative prayer, of solitary prayer that flows down through the centuries is not separate from the activity of the church. It's not separate from the institutional church or all of the, corporal works of mercy or all of the orphanages or all of the hospitals or all of the soup kitchens, all the good things the church does. On the contrary, it is the heart of that. It is what fuels it, it's what feeds it, it's what makes it possible. Without it, there would be neither liturgy nor church. Now, this isn't the show on St. Faustina's diary, so I don't have the quotes. But in St. Faustina's diary, Jesus says, precisely, not word for word, but precisely, "For your sake, I will spare Poland the worst of it." For the sake of one contemplative, weak little nun praying her heart out, Poland was spared. wasn't spared everything, but was spared destruction. How many tens of thousands of men, with their tanks and with their bulldozers and with their submachine guns could have saved Poland, right? How many would have taken? And this little nun did. Similarly, Jesus says something even more frightening. I don't remember the number. I don't remember whether he gives a number like 30 or something. I'll know it by the time I do my St. Faustina show. But he says, there are very, very, very few chosen souls around the world who are united to me in prayer and pleasing to me. And it is for their sake that I spare the world. That the entire world is spared for the sake of some number like 30 or 40 or 50 chosen souls who are united in a very special way and very specially pleasing to God. By the way, according to the Jewish mystical tradition, I think there are 39 men, I should say people, I don't remember which. I think it's probably men because Judaism is pretty male chauvinist, that are saving the world. That the pleasing prayer of 39 men around the world is why God spares the world. And you remember in the Old Testament the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when God says, if there are 10 pleasing to me men in Sodom, I will spare the city. It's a city of, 100,000 or something, 200,000. So, the worldlings who think that these contemplative religious are not doing any good for the rest of the world have it exactly backwards. They're doing the most good for the world. Okay, back to Edith Stein. You're not listening to this to hear me preach. Every true prayer is a prayer of the church. Every true prayer has repercussions within the church. And every true prayer is ultimately prayed by the church, since it is the church's indwelling Holy Spirit that prays within each individual, quote, with sighs too deep for words, close quote. This is the mark of all true prayer. Those who have reached this level truly are the heart of the church. They radiate to other hearts the divine love which fills their own, and join with Jesus in working towards the fulfillment of his one great goal, the restoration of all things to unity in God. Just what I said. Then she talks about what it means to be a mystic. The mystic is simply a person who has an experiential knowledge of the teaching of the church, that God dwells in the soul. Anyone who feels inspired by this teaching to search for God will end up taking the same route the mystic is led along. He will retreat from the realm of the senses, the images of the memory, and the natural functioning of the intellect, and will withdraw into the barren solitude of the inner self to dwell in the darkness of faith through a simple, loving glance of the Spirit at God, who is present although concealed. There he will remain in profound peace, as in the place of his rest, until the Lord decides to transform his faith into vision. Now I'm getting ahead of myself here, because actually what she's talking about here is deeply related to her understanding of John of the Cross and the dark night of the soul. A nod is as good as a wink to a blind man. She's actually just talking about the dark night of the soul here. I'll talk about that more when I read things from the book she wrote about the dark night of the soul, which is called The Signs of the Cross. And I'll just repeat this line from here. He will retreat from the realm of the senses, the images of the memory, and the natural functioning of the intellect, and will withdraw into the barren solitude of the inner self to dwell in the darkness of faith through a simple loving glance of the Spirit at God, who is present although concealed. That, in a nutshell, is the reason for the dark night of the soul. That, in a nutshell, is actually St. John of the Cross. Anyway, by the way, the readings, most of these readings, I haven't footnoted it, so I'm not sure in my notes, but virtually all of the readings I'm giving from that I'm not attributing to other things are from this biography of Edith Stein. You can see, actually, you see all those post-it notes or all those tabs? Those are, quotes that I wanted to copy out of the book. So you can see it's really just full of really good quotes. Okay, back to Edith Stein on prayer. Once you are joined to the Lord, you become as omnipresent as He is. In the power of the cross, you have the ability to be everywhere at once, at every scene of misery. Your compassionate love, drawn from the Redeemer's heart, can take you in all directions, allowing you to sprinkle on every side the precious blood that soothes, heals, and redeems. Do you see the eyes of the crucified looking at you with a searching gaze? They are asking you a question. Are you, in all seriousness, ready to enter once again into a covenant with the crucified? What are you going to answer? Remember, her motto in religion was Ave Crux Spes Unica. Hail Cross, our only hope. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go out of sequence here and read this great quote, which again is everything in a nutshell. Somebody knows. I don't want to say somebody knows more than me. Everyone knows more than me. Not everyone, but I mean, between you definitely know more than me. Am I referring to the 36 righteous ones? So if that's a reference to what I said about Judaism, yeah, it's 36. It's not 38. It's not 39. It's 36 righteous ones. This is the disadvantage of flying by the seat of my pants. Is I have all these little factoids floating in the back of my head, but they're in a pretty foggy place back there, and when I pull them to the front, sometimes they're a little distorted. Anyway, okay, so let me read that wonderful quote that I wanted to read. Okay, here it is. I'll put it up here, and I'll read it at the same time. By assuming human nature, Christ became capable of suffering and dying. His divine nature, which he has had from eternity, gave infinite value and a redeeming power to his suffering and death. Christ's suffering and death continues in his mystical body and in each one of his members. Everyone has to suffer and die, and if he is a living member of the body of Christ, then his death and suffering acquires redemptive power through the divine nature of the head. In the light of the mystery of redemption, this is the ultimate raison d'etre, reason for being. The way of the Son of God is to get to the resurrection through suffering on the cross. Getting to resurrection glory with the Son of Man through suffering and death is also the way for each one of us and for all mankind. Okay, everyone can go home. End of the show. Can end it there. Again, what I don't want to say what more can be said, because obviously I'm going to babble a lot more. But Ave Crux Spes Unica. Hail Cross, our only hope. The cross is our only hope. Question is, actually, this is again from St. Faustina. The only question is, are we dragging our cross behind us, discontentedly and resentfully, or do we embrace it and carry it willingly? We're going to have the cross anyway, but our eternity is going to be very different depending on whether we embrace the cross or not, okay? Getting to resurrection glory with the Son of Man through suffering and death is also the way for each one of us and for all mankind. The question is, how willingly do we carry our cross? As she said in this other quote I read, Do you see the eyes of the crucified looking at you with a searching gaze? They are asking you a question. Are you, in all seriousness, ready to enter once again into a covenant with the crucified? Are you ready to volunteer to carry the cross? Anyway, back to where I was planning to be here. Now, I went 33. She enters Carmel, 30. Whenever I said 34 or 5, she's professed. These are writings of hers from then. Then we come to 1938. And what happened in 1938 was Kristallnacht. That means, usually it's translated Night of the Broken Glass. And what it was Antifa on steroids all over Germany. They pretended this was just a popular uprising, but it wasn't. It was as organized as the Antifa riots are organized. You guys all know that, right? U-Haul trailers came into the towns and unloaded the fireworks that the rioters were using, unloaded the masks and the helmets and all of their gear that they were protecting themselves with, unloaded the iron bars or whatever they used to smash things. These U-Haul trucks were U-Haul trailers were sent by someone and were being paid by somebody. And as a matter of fact, you can actually verify this. One, I don't remember who it was. I think it was actually a congressperson in Washington, D.C., was staying at a $500 a night hotel in D.C. when the Antifa riots were going on in D.C. And the rioters were staying in the same hotel. They were going back there, 11 o'clock at night or at 1 in the morning to sleep in their $500 a night beds. They weren't paying for that. I have a feeling that a very wealthy Hungarian Jew was paying for that. Okay? It was all orchestrated. Antifa. It was all fake to look like, this grassroots hate. In the case of Antifa, this grassroots rebellion against God knows what, racism and the unfairness of the United States. And I don't even know what they were rebelling against, actually. And Kristallnacht was the prototype for that, okay? It was, a Nazi organized, planned, nationwide Antifa night where Jewish homes were vandalized, their businesses were vandalized, their synagogues were vandalized or burned down. And it was called Kristallnacht because all of the Jewish stores had all of their windows smashed. And therefore the streets were covered with broken glass. So here you see a scene from, the next day of people walking by stores with all of the store windows smashed out. The things inside the windows probably stolen too. And that's why it was called Kristallnacht, was because of all the broken glass on the streets. And it wasn't just smashing glass, but it was also burning down synagogues, dozens and dozens. I don't know if it was hundreds of synagogues or not throughout Germany. There is one of the large synagogues in smoking embers after Kristallnacht. So this was in November of 1938, and it became apparent to Edith Stein after Kristallnacht that the days of Jews being able to live in Germany had drawn to a close, and that they would not be able to stay in Germany. So after Kristallnacht, she left the Carmel in Cologne, which is a city in Germany, for a Carmel in Echt, which is in Holland, on the Belgian border, but in Holland. She left on December 31st, 1938. Kristallnacht was in November of 1938. I think it was November 11th. I'm not sure what day of 1938. So it was, a month later. And she actually would have been able to go to someplace truly safe, like Switzerland. I think it was a convent in Switzerland that was willing to receive her. Switzerland stayed neutral during the war, so she would not have been killed by the Nazis. But they couldn't take her sister Rosa. Rosa was not Yet she wasn't actually never a nun. She wasn't a nun. She was simply living in the convent. And the Swiss were not in a position to receive her. So Edith Stein would not abandon her sister Rosa, so they went together to Echt. Now, when she got to Echt, she wrote her spiritual last will and testament. Am I saying Kristallnacht? My German is not very good. I'm saying Kristallnacht. Kristalnacht. I think that's right, actually. I might have one vowel wrong. Kristallnacht. So it would be Crystal Night translated, or usually called Night of Broken Glass. So anyway, so she goes to Echt. Now here is a photograph of her cell in Echt, which I find very moving. It's just a convent cell, but it was Edith Stein's cell. And here's a picture of the convent in Echt. So anyway, so that is her in Echt. Oh, and here's, they have a museum. I think this is actually, the museum is in Cologne, in the convent in Cologne. But here is actually Edith Stein's choir robe, choir mantle. You know, when they do the liturgies in the chapel, they put on it's like, you know, the tallis that Jews wear when they pray. They have choir robes that separate their prayer function from their other functions. You know, it's like a tallis, like the Jewish prayer shawl. Their choir robe, or choir, I don't know what they call it, choir mantle, choir robe. And that's actually Edith Stein's. But anyway, so where was I? I was here in Echt. And it was here at the convent in Echt that she made out her spiritual last will and testament. And I showed this last time, but it's worth showing again. This is it in her own handwriting. So lest anyone want to have a revisionist PC version that Edith Stein was, you know, not as anti-Semitic as this sounds. She wasn't anti-Semitic at all, of course. But here's that whole theme I talked about a lot last show. That for Edith Stein, look, she was a Jewish convert. She was a Jewish Catholic saint and martyr. Of course, she knew that the Catholic Church is the true Judaism, that the Catholic Church is the continuation of Judaism. Judaism is a true religion. It's 100% true as it was given by God to the Jews. God is entirely behind Judaism until about 2,000 years ago, because the point of Judaism was to bring about the coming of the Messiah and be transformed into the Catholic Church. A Jew who is, I'm going to put my face up here if I'm going to be preaching on my own. A Jew who is completely a Jew has to be in the Catholic Church, because Judaism has moved to the Catholic Church. Judaism has been transformed into the Catholic Church. So you can't be a good Jew outside the Catholic Church. 2,000 years ago, you could be a good Jew outside the Catholic Church, because Judaism had not yet been transformed into the Catholic Church. But as of 33 AD, you know, as of Pentecost Sunday, 33 AD, if you were a Jew outside the Catholic Church, you were a half-assed Jew. I can use that expression. I don't think YouTube is going to kick me off for that. Anyway, I apologize for the vulgarity. But you could only be a vestigial Jew, because you're missing the transformation of Judaism. You know, the sacrifices of the Old Testament were transformed into the sacraments of the Catholic Church. The animal sacrifices in the temple were transformed into the death of Christ on the cross and the making present over and over again his sacrifice on the cross at every Catholic Mass. Eating the Passover lamb, which was necessary to be a member of the Jewish people and to have salvation through Judaism, according to the Old Testament. Eating the Passover lamb on Passover was transformed into consuming the Eucharist at the Catholic Mass The Catholic Mass was the transformed Passover Seder. In fact, the last legitimate Passover Seder, let's say, was the first legitimate Catholic Mass, which was the Last Supper. Okay. So anyway, of course, Edith Stein understood this better than I do, a billion times better than I do. So of course, her understanding was that the Catholic Church was the real Judaism. That is considered anti-Semitic today, not only by Jews who can't be blamed for it because they don't know better, because they don't think the Catholic faith is true, but God forbid, by Catholics, including Catholic theologians who even represent the Church and who work for the bishops' conferences and who work for the Vatican at times. Okay. So, but everyone loves Edith Stein because she's a saint and she's this great hero. So the politically correct Catholic world is kind of caught, between a rock and a hard place because they want to embrace Edith Stein, but they want to reject her theology, which is that the Catholic Church is a continuation of Judaism. So the way they do that is they try to dismiss all of the quotes and all of the citations of Edith Stein, which express this belief that the Catholic Church is the true Judaism. So they say, she didn't really say that. The person who's recounting that she said that made that up themselves. This is a urban myth or something that she said that. It's simply hearsay that she said that. Well, they can't say that with her last will and testament because we have right here in black and white, we have the photocopy of it. Now, this was the biography that I really liked of hers, the Herbstrith one. They used to have, in the first, I think, 5 editions of this biography, they had a photocopy of Edith Stein's last will and testament. They took it out. I read the correspondence between the author, Waltraud Herbstrith, and a Jewish critic who didn't like the fact that the photocopy was in there. And Herbstrith took it out because it was too damning. Because, of course, if you have the photocopy of Edith Stein's writings, you can't say that she never really said that. So anyway, they didn't want to rub, I guess, the Jews' faces in the fact that she really said that. So they took out the photocopy. It used to be in the front of that book. Anyway, this is what she says in her last will and testament. I joyfully accept in advance the death that God has appointed for me, in perfect submission and with joy, as being his most holy will. May the Lord accept my life and my death for the atonement of the unbelief of the Jewish people. My gosh, there was a failure on the part of the Jewish people because they didn't receive the Messiah. How dare she say that it's something that requires atonement, that they rejected the Jewish Messiah. Now, there's another side of this coin that I talk about too. But anyway, back to Edith Stein. For the atonement of the unbelief of the Jewish people, and for this, that the Lord may be accepted by his own people. Oy vey, Edith Stein would like to see all the Jews come to Christ. Oh, how anti-Semitic she is. Come on. How can you be a Jew who knows the truth and be consumed with love of your own people, the Jewish people, and not pray and beg God to give the grace of conversion to the other Jewish people? I mean, that's obviously what my whole ministry is about. That's what my book is about. Salvation is from the Jews. Edith Stein, okay, so I talk the talk. Wonderful. I give conferences and talks, and I have email exchanges with Jews interested in the Catholic Church. That's a great sacrifice. Edith Stein died at Auschwitz, okay, in order to bring about the conversion of her own people, the Jewish people, in other words. Okay, so she walked the walk. I mean, she wasn't just babbling about the need for it. She actually gave her life in the most horrible suffering imaginable for it. She knew what she was talking about. May the Lord accept my life and my death for the atonement of the unbelief of the Jewish people, and for this, that the Lord may be accepted by his own people, and that his kingdom may come in glory. Amen. That last line, that his kingdom may come in glory, is a reference to the fact that the second coming ain't about to happen until there's a widespread conversion of the Jews. That's based on Romans 11. In the New Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 674, it says, quote, "The glorious Messiah's coming is suspended at every moment of history until his recognition by all Israel." Jesus can't come again until there's a widespread conversion of the Jews. And that's the reference in that his kingdom may come in glory. Okay. Let's see where to go from here. Okay. More little snippets of her writings about the salvific value of suffering. That's what she was all about, right? "Human activities cannot help us, but only the suffering of Christ. It is my desire to share in it." It's like her last will and testament. She wants to do as much good as possible. Human activities cannot help us, but only the suffering of Christ and us willingly participating in it. Again, I understood the cross as the destiny of God's people, which was beginning to be apparent at the time. I felt that those who understood the cross of Christ should take it upon themselves on everybody's behalf. Beneath the cross, I understood the destiny of God's people. The Holocaust was the cross of Christ falling on the Jewish people. Now, as I said, she's offering her life for the salvation of her people, actually, for the salvation of the Jewish people, for the atonement of the sins of the Jewish people. Where did that occur in the Old Testament? Queen Esther, the story of Queen Esther. I alluded to this last show. Or I think I said it last show, so I'm repeating myself. Queen Esther offered her life for the salvation of her own people, the Jewish people. That's what the story of Esther is about. It's in the book of Esther. You can read the whole Megillah. That's a little pun if any Jews are watching. The Megillah is the name of the book of Esther in Hebrew. But it's also used as an expression to be like the whole deal, the whole big deal, because it's read in one sitting. So the whole Megillah, the whole book of Esther. But anyway, Esther was a Jewish woman who became the queen of a non-Jewish king who didn't know she was Jewish. And the king had imposed a death penalty, essentially, on all the Jews in the kingdom. And Queen Esther, at the risk of her life, presented herself to the king. You weren't allowed to present yourself to the king if you weren't invited, and she wasn't invited. She presented herself to the king and told him that she was Jewish and begged him to spare her people, the Jewish people. And instead of having her killed, which she expected to happen when she presented herself to him, she actually fell in a faint. She fainted in fear when she presented herself to him. But instead of ordering her head cut off, the king was moved with pity for her and spared the Jewish people. So she was like, Edith Stein identified with this story, of course. So let me read another quote of Edith Stein's about this. "I firmly believe that the Lord has accepted my life as an offering for all. It's important to me to keep Queen Esther in mind and remember how she was separated from her people just so that she could intercede for them before the king. I myself certainly am a poor and insignificant little Esther, but I take comfort from the fact that the king who has chosen me is infinitely kind and merciful." So you see, Queen Esther separated herself from the Jewish people because she hid her Jewishness when she became a concubine of the king and then finally his favorite queen. She was separated from the Jewish people. But she did it in the hands of providence in order to later save her own people. Edith Stein, by becoming a Catholic and a Carmelite, separated herself from her people. But in the eyes of providence, she did it in order to later intercede for her own people and save her own people. And Esther was insignificant. She's insignificant, Edith Stein. But the king that Esther appealed to was very powerful. And the king that Edith Stein appealed to is not only infinitely more powerful, but infinitely merciful and infinitely kind. So, okay. So, I will eventually get to the end of the show. You can always cut and resume later. I'm actually not going to be terribly late. I think I'll only probably be maybe about 2 hours and 15 minutes max. Okay, so things got worse and worse, of course, after Kristallnacht. In 1940, Rosa joined Edith Stein in Echt. In 1940, the Germans occupied Holland. Okay, so Holland didn't last long before the German occupation, and they essentially ruled Holland. But just like the Romans at the time of Jesus, you see this with the Romans and the Jews in the Old Testament. You know, when an invading foreign power takes over a country, they don't want a revolt on their hands. They don't want all the citizenry to simultaneously pick up their pitchforks, and start stabbing every German soldier on the street. They want to placate. Even though they're an occupied people, they want to placate the occupied nation. That's a story in the New Testament, by the way. When you read the story of the Jews and the Romans and Pontius Pilate and Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate didn't want a revolt on his hands. He'd get in trouble. He'd actually get killed by Caesar if he had another revolt. The next blood that is shed is going to be yours. So anyway, even though they're an occupying power, the Romans, they want to keep the populace calm. They don't want everyone to, take up whatever axe they have and start slashing the occupying power. Same thing with the Germans in Holland. Same thing with the Germans actually throughout the Third Reich. Same thing with the Germans in France. You could be an occupied country in this kind of state of tension between the occupied people and the occupier, a kind of détente. A little side point, okay? I became very close to a Benedictine abbot in France, Father Augustine, Abbot Augustine, of a monastery there, a wonderful monastery called Flavigny, which is the town it's in. And he was the chief of police of Grenoble under the German occupation during World War II. France and Holland were similar situations. In other words, they were occupied by this hostile power, Germany, but they were cooperating enough to keep things from exploding. And I spoke to Abbot Augustine many hours, because I used to stay at the monastery, and he was an old man and I wasn't a monk, so I had the free time to visit with him, and the other reasons too, that we formed a deep friendship. And he told me what it was like. He was a very fervent Catholic at the time. It was before he was a monk, needless to say. He was a layperson. He had been a soldier, and then he became the chief of police under the Nazi occupation. And he told what it was like, because basically he wanted to save as many French lives as possible. But he didn't want to antagonize the German occupying forces so much that they would start slaughtering the French people. And so his job, it was like really, again, between a rock and a hard place, because, what do you do if you're the chief of police and let's say the Gestapo leader in that town tells you to arrest these people and turn them over to the Gestapo, Like, do you do it, in which case you're really collaborating with the enemy? Or do you refuse to do it, in which case, you probably get killed, but worse than that, the Gestapo chooses somebody else to be the chief of police who's going to be more cooperative? Or do you drag your feet and cooperate as little as possible? I guess they call it slow walking now. The FBI did this with the Russian investigation. Slow walked it. Do you cooperate as little as possible while you still keep your job? Anyway, so that was the state in Holland. So okay, meanwhile, I'm just painting the backdrop. Okay, so then you have the Nazis take over Holland. They're ruling the place, but they're allowing some local governance, of course, and they want to keep things kind of in the state of détente. And then the churches in Holland, we're talking about 1942 now, so the deportations have begun. And I don't want to say everybody knows, but lots of people know that the Jews are being, at the very least, forcibly deported into slave labor camps in the East. But many of them knew they were being exterminated. But anyway, in any case, that this terrible persecution of the Jews are going on. So the Christian leaders in Holland want to object to this persecution of the Jews that's going on. The Jews have already been deported by Holland, from Holland, by the way, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure, as a matter of fact, all of them were deported. And so the Christian leaders are saying, hey, come on, they're my brothers. I can't let them be deported and not object. So they all get together and they decide to do something about it. So they write a letter to the what's it called? I have it right. Reichskommissar. Reich, that's the Third Reich. Commissar is commissar, whatever we're going to call it. The Caesar. I don't know if the word actually comes from Caesar, but the leader of the Third Reich in Holland, and they write a letter to him objecting to the treatment of the Jews, and he comes down like a ton of bricks on the Protestant pastors and the Catholic bishops, who had they sent a telegram, I believe, to him. And he basically says, if you know what's good for you, you're going to shut up and sit down. Well, all of the Protestant pastors did shut up and sit down, but not the Catholic leading bishop of Holland, the Bishop of Utrecht. And he refused to back down. And he had a letter read in all the Catholic parishes in Holland on the following Sunday, objecting to the Nazi persecution of the Jews. And it was read in all the Catholic parishes of Holland on July 26, 1942. And here is an extract from it. Dear brethren, when Jesus drew near to Jerusalem and saw the city before him, he wept over it and said, "Oh, if even today you understood the things that make for peace, but now they are concealed from your sight. Let us beseech God to bring about swiftly a just peace in the world, and to strengthen the people of Israel so sorely tested in these days, leading them to true redemption in Christ Jesus." Okay, now, two sides to what I'm doing here by reading this. Okay, we all know, if you've looked into Edith Stein at all, you all know that the bishops all had this letter read in all the churches that criticized the Nazi treatment of the Jews. And in retaliation, the very next day, the Reichskommissar ordered all of the Catholics of Jewish heritage to be deported to the concentration camps. I'll get to that in a moment. So you all know that part of the story, that here the Catholic bishops objected to the treatment of the Jews. In retaliation, the Nazis actually sent to the extermination camps not only all the Jews who were already goners, but all of the Catholics who had Jewish blood. And that's used as an example to show that maybe Pius XII was using correct prudence in not condemning the Nazi extermination of the Jews in a way that would have actually made more retaliation. But you never hear anyone say in today's church that in this letter was calling for prayer for the conversion of the Jews. Because in fact, listen to what he's saying there. He's starting out, this is an extract, so he's not literally starting out. But in the extract, he's starting out saying, "When Jesus drew near to Jerusalem and saw the city before him, he wept over it and said, 'Oh, if only today you understood the things that make for peace.'" What was Jesus talking about? What are the things that make for peace? What are the things that would have made for peace in Jerusalem instead of it being destroyed in 70 AD? Conversion to Christ, accepting the Messiah, accepting Christ. That's the thing that makes for peace. The bishops are saying, look, when Jesus wept over Jerusalem, he said, oh, if only you understood what made for peace. That is, receiving me, receiving the Messiah. That was what made for peace 2,000 years ago, if only you had done it. And that's what would make for peace today, if only you would do it. You have to come to Christ to have peace. So going on with it, believe me, I'm not adding a single word to this. But now what makes for peace is concealed from your sight. Let us beseech God to bring about swiftly a just peace in the world, bringing you to Christ, and to strengthen the people of Israel so sorely tested in these days, leading them to the true redemption in Christ Jesus. This is all a prayer for the conversion of the Jews. You're never going to hear Eugene Fisher or any of the Jewish Catholic Dialogue Office in the USCCB ever quoting this letter because it's so politically incorrect. And they want to take this letter and put it on their side, saying, see, this was political. I don't know how to put it, but this was all, so ahead of its time. This objecting to the persecution of the Jews, it was what, of course, we're doing today in the Catholic Jewish dialogue. Yeah, of course it was objecting to the persecution of the Jews, but in the light of the fact that the only true solution for the Jews is coming to faith in Jesus Christ. And therefore, this letter that was read in the churches to encourage peace was a letter encouraging prayer for the conversion of the Jews. Okay, well, I hope you guys followed that. Anyway, what was the response the very next day of Reichskommissar SS Group Leader Rauter? Quote, since the Catholic bishops have interfered in something that does not concern them, deportation of all Catholic Jews will be speeded up and completed within the coming week. No appeals for clemency will be considered. That's exactly what happened. And Edith Stein and her sister Rosa were among those people rounded up that very week and deported to Auschwitz with a couple of way stations on the way, because the truck that picked them up at the convent was a truck. It wasn't a train. So it took them to a transit hall, let's say, a first transit place. And then that night, they were transported from that transit place to a true transit camp, which is like a mini concentration camp, for, I believe it was about a week, until the train to Auschwitz was ready to take them to Auschwitz. And they died as soon as they got off the train in Auschwitz. I'll get to there, but I'm still in this. Okay, so that very week after the reading of this letter, the letter was read Sunday, July 26, 1942. On Sunday, August 2nd, that's a week to the day, after that letter was read in the churches, the Gestapo show up at the convent of Echt. They knew where all the Jews were. They knew where all the Jewish Catholics were. They had very good records. It didn't take them any time to find people. Here's another digression for you. Another book recommendation, too. What happened to the bishop? I think he's considered saint. He wasn't persecuted by the Nazis, if that's what you mean. That was part of their, they don't want to revolt on their hands, okay? So he speaks up for the Jews. We're going to teach you. We're going to deport all of the Catholic Jews. It's not like we're going to deport the bishop or the head bishop of whatever you call it, of Holland, because that would stir up more of a hornet's nest. Anyway, but back to what I was saying. How did the Nazis know where all the Jews were so that, in a matter of hours or days, they could round them all up? They had IBM computers. I'm not joking. It's a very good book. I think it's called IBM and the Holocaust. And the Third Reich was a huge customer of IBM. And IBM computers in those days, they didn't have computers the way we know them, but they had card sorters. Are any of you old enough to remember those like cardboard cards? They would be about 3 inches by 8 inches long with punched holes in them. When I began programming at MIT, and actually my first job after MIT, we still use those punch cards. Anyway, so they had the early version of the IBM computers were essentially punch card sorters. And you could take a stack, you'd have these punch cards, and you'd have holes punched in them, okay? And the holes punched in them, might spell out somebody's address. And the holes punched in them would say whether they were Jewish. And the holes punched in them would say what their birth date was. And so all of that was like encoded in the punched holes. And then they would feed them through these very fast sorting machines. They would just go, I should have a clip of this, but I don't. Maybe you've seen it in movies. And the cards would go like this, and they would drop into columns, depending on what holes had been punched. So they could have a stack of cards, 10,000 cards, 100,000 cards, representing the population of Echt. And they could run it through their IBM machines and pull out all of the Jews. And they could pull out all of the Catholic Jews. And they could have their addresses. And they had this like throughout the Third Reich. The book is called IBM and the Holocaust. And it's very heavily documented. I mean, this is all true. As a matter of fact, IBM had IBM engineers stationed in the Third Reich in Germany to help the Germans use their machines, I'm sure they were well paid for it. I told my father this. My father, of course, was a German Jewish Holocaust refugee. And he said, we always wondered how they got to us so quick. We always wondered how, within hours they could find all the Jews in a town. Well, this is how they were able to. Yeah. Oh, you guys are so much smarter than me. UNIVAC cards, yes. Well, apparently the Wikipedia entry, there must be a Wikipedia entry on IBM and the Holocaust. While IBM has never directly denied any of the evidence posed by the book. Yeah, it's incontrovertible. So anyway, so they got to her exactly a week after. Okay, so she's in her convent, and she's writing at her desk. And the Gestapo show up at the door, and they give her 5 minutes to pack a bag and to come with her. So, like, she puts down the pen. What was she writing? She had just finished a book. The book is called The Science of the Cross. Is that a good book to finish when you're about to be taken to Auschwitz as a Catholic Jew? And it is a book on the spirituality of John of the Cross. I was going to read some of it. I'm not going to ask you for permission because you can always turn this off and restart. It would be fake because I know that the people who are chatting are the people who are most enthusiastic about me continuing. I will read this because she just finished this book before being taken away. This is a big shift in gears. I'll get back to her death, finish the show with her death. But this is her book, The Science of the Cross. I have a copy here. This is the old edition. It doesn't look like this anymore. Edith Stein, The Science of the Cross. The Carmelites came out with a new edition, which I have somewhere up here. Maybe I'll pull it up for a moment if I have it. If I can find it. Oh, man. I'll take a deep breath at the same time. No, I don't see it there. Not serious. Anyway, this is an extract from the book. Now, this book was recommended to me by the prior general of the Carthusian order, actually, by the head of the Carthusians. He urged me to read it because he said it takes John of the Cross's spirituality, which John of the Cross was 16th century, early 16th century, late 15th century, and his sensibility is from 500 years ago. And what Father Marcellin said was that Edith Stein takes the teaching of John of the Cross and puts it into a 20th century sensibility and intellectual structure so that it's much more accessible, which is true. Okay, goodbye, Jane. I see your chat. I'll come back for dinner sometime. Okay. So let me read this extract from The Science of the Cross. This is very important because, let me set this up a little bit. Thank God for the charismatic renewal in the Catholic Church. The charismatic renewal is wonderful. It's done a wonderful amount of good. And I was totally embedded in the charismatic renewal, for a decade at least after my entry into the church. And I'm very, very grateful to it. But there is a danger with the charismatic renewal. There's a danger with everything. It doesn't mean there's anything bad about the charismatic renewal, but everything has its dark side or disadvantage. And the disadvantage with the charismatic renewal is that one can get a lot of consolation in prayer. One can get a lot of delicious spiritual experience from the charismatic renewal. One can sometimes even get signs and wonders, right? And see the sun spinning in the sky or see Jesus in the Eucharist or whatever. These are very wonderful things. One can feel Jesus. That's the best thing. But one can feel Jesus in one's heart, maybe after receiving communion. One can get a supernatural joy of the Holy Spirit. These are wonderful, wonderful things. But God's plan for the sanctification of every human soul is that there comes a period when all of that is withdrawn. It's called the dark night of the soul. And one has to persevere in dryness, in total dryness, and in a total absence of spiritual consolations. I talked about this in the St. Ignatius show too, by the way. Consolations is kind of like the technical term for anything that feels good from prayer. Whether it's something supernatural like a miracle or a locution, or whether it's simply a warm and gushy feeling inside, or the joy of the Holy Spirit, or whatever. These are all consolations. God's plan is for everybody, as they progress in the spiritual life, to go through a desert without any consolations. When one is called to remain faithful and to attach oneself only to God in faith and in hope, without any feelings, without any warmth, without any thing sustaining one, except this abstract faith and abstract hope in some sense. So the danger is that if one comes through the charismatic renewal, one comes through a charismatic spirituality, and this happens, if you don't know that it's going to happen, and if you don't know how to deal with it, and if you don't know why it's happening, maybe you give up. Maybe you decide that you've lost your salvation and that, somehow you're damned to hell. Maybe you just go in a tailspin. So you have to be prepared for this. You have to know about it. And so because of the charismatic renewal, and because lots of, us fervent Catholics, have a foot in the charismatic renewal, it's very important to know about this dark night of the soul, about the desert experience. So that's why I'm doing this. To the words of the words of Edith Stein explaining the dark night of the soul based on John of the Cross's work. In the childhood of the spiritual life, when we have just begun to allow ourselves to be directed by God, we feel his guiding hand quite firmly and surely. We know as clear as day what we should or should not do, but it doesn't always stay that way. Anyone who belongs to Christ is destined to pass through all the stages of his life, up to and including his adulthood and eventually even to the way of the cross that leads to Gethsemane and Golgotha. When that hour comes, external sufferings are nothing compared to the dark night of the soul, when the divine light stops shining and the divine voice stops speaking. It isn't that God isn't there, but that he's concealed and silent. Why, you ask? That is one of God's secrets. That is one of God's secrets. But whoever belongs to Christ must go the whole way with him. He must mature to adulthood. He must one day or the other walk the way of the cross to Gethsemane and Golgotha. Each of us is perpetually on the razor's edge. On one side, absolute nothingness. On the other side, the fullness of divine life. The way of faith leads through a dark night, and it is the way of the cross. However, there has also been so much talk about light and bliss that often it might have appeared as though the theme of darkness and of the cross had been set aside. But this entire realm of enlightenment and graces has been unfolded only to show that one must renounce it. I don't think I can add anything to this. So why do I try? That last sentence is really powerful, though. All of the consolations that we might have gotten in 15 years after our reversion to the faith or after our conversion to the faith, all of those consolations were only given to us to prepare us for the dark night of the soul. This is the true fruit. This is where the fruit lies. The fruit doesn't lie, and she's going to go on to explain this, it doesn't lie in the desert per se, but it lies in what waits at the other side of the desert. But one has to pass through this desert. Okay. I'll just read the last sentence over and then I'll continue. The way of faith leads through a dark night, and it is the way of the cross. However, there has also been so much talk about light and bliss that often it might have appeared as though the theme of darkness and of the cross had been set aside, right, in our lives. Right? She's not talking about people writing about the faith. I mean, in our lives, we might forget about the way of the cross because we've had so much light and bliss. So much feeling of Jesus' guiding hand on us and so forth. And that might have appeared that the way of the cross has been set aside for us. However, this entire realm of enlightenment of graces has been unfolded only to show that one must renounce it, only to prepare us for the desert. Since the soul must know God more by what he is not than by what he is, she must journey to him by way of the denial and rejection of natural and supernatural apprehensions, rather than by admitting them. In other words, the soul must pass through this period when we must journey to God, not through this supernatural and natural feelings and learnings and stuff, but through the rejection of them. Because anything that is accessible to our intellect or accessible to our feelings is not God himself. She explains this more, so I'll just go on. Further harm comes from the intervention of the devil. He can add to the soul's knowledge new impressions, ideas, and reasonings, and by means of them move her to pride, avarice, anger, envy, and so on, and seduce her to unjust hatred and vain love. Now, I have seen a lot of this. I came through the New Age before I found my way to the Catholic Church. Nothing fuels vanity and self-love and spiritual vainglory more than spiritual experiences do, okay? How many of you, do I see any hands up there of other people? I mean, if you are having supernatural experiences, the devil it's the devil's playground for filling you with pride, making you feel superior to other people. A very close friend of mine went on a charismatic retreat weekend, and she was told by her roommates that since she did not have the gift of speaking in tongues, she was going to hell. She didn't have salvation because she didn't have the gift of tongues. I mean, that kind of stuff. You know, you have to be very careful about it, because the devil can use all of these supernatural gifts to feed our vanity, our self-love, our spiritual vainglory. That's when she said here, further harm comes from the intervention of the devil. So I'm just fleshing that out a little bit. If the soul wishes to go to God, she must replace the changeable and comprehensible by the unchangeable and incomprehensible. Now, this is going to be, she's going to do a better job than me in talking about this in a moment. But God is unchanging, and God is incomprehensible. Everything that we've gained so far up to this point in our spiritual lives is changeable and comprehensible. And we have to replace that by God himself, who is unchangeable and incomprehensible. Continuing with Edith Stein, the more importance given to any clear and distinct apprehension, natural or supernatural, the less capacity and preparedness the soul has for entering the abyss of faith where all else is absorbed. For none of these forms or ideas is God, and therefore they cannot serve as a proximate means for union with God. In other words, they can't directly be stepping stones to God, because they are mutable, they are comprehensible, they are not God himself. We need stepping stones that are God himself, so to speak, which means immutable and incomprehensible, which is very related to the blindness of faith and the blindness of hope, where we are just going on faith alone without any supporting feelings, and hope alone without any supporting feelings. Okay, continuing with Edith Stein. For every possession is against hope, right? We hope for what we don't have. We don't hope for what we have. Everything we have is a contradiction to hope. Every possession is against hope. The more, therefore, that the memory practices detachment, the more hope it wins. And the more hope grows, the more intimately the soul is united with God. You see, because we're trying to effect a union of the soul with God. That's going on completely invisibly. That's going on through the blind faith and blind hope, let's say. Anyway. The more, therefore, that the memory practices detachment, the more hope it wins, and the more hope grows, the more intimately the soul is united with God. When the memory has reached perfect dispossession, it will remain with perfect possession of God in divine union. Okay? When the memory has reached perfect dispossession, it will remain with perfect possession. The memory, the intellect, have to distance themselves entirely from a sense of being God, essentially. I mean, a sense of connection with God, because they're not a connection with God himself. They're a connection with feelings and apprehensions and understandings, which are not God himself. The soul has to detach themselves from those things so that it's free to attach itself to God. I'm continuing with Edith Stein now. Virtue does not consist in apprehensions and feelings of God, no matter how sublime they may be. It so consists in deep humility and contempt of oneself. One must be convinced that all visions, revelations, and supernatural feelings are far less valuable than the slightest act of humility. Humility includes within itself the effects of a love that does not esteem itself and seeks to think evil only of oneself and no good of oneself, but indeed so of others. I'll just go back over that a little bit. Virtue does not consist in apprehensions and feelings of God, no matter how sublime they may be. There's no virtue in mystical experiences. Yeah, there's no virtue in mystical experiences. There's temptation in mystical experiences, but there's no virtue in them. It's not a growth at all. As a matter of fact, it's like a near occasion of sin, actually. It's a near occasion of shrinkage of virtue because of the devil's playground of appealing to pride and envy and superiority and self-love and so forth. Virtue doesn't consist in these supernatural apprehensions and feelings of God. Virtue consists in deep humility and contempt of oneself. The opposite. All visions, revelations, and supernatural feelings are far less valuable than the slightest act of humility. The humility contains within itself the effects of a love that does not esteem oneself, does things only evil of oneself, and no good of oneself, but only good of others. Continuing. The evil enemy has the power to present to the memory and imagination false knowledge and images which appear to be true and good. He appears as an angel of light and can arouse disorderly sensual and spiritual feelings to cast her into spiritual gluttony. Mea culpa, mea culpa. I'm sure that all of us who have had wonderful, pleasant spiritual experiences know the temptation of spiritual gluttony. We just want more and more and more and more. That's why I checked into the Carthusians, to tell the truth. That's exactly the wrong reason. But a lot of the appeal of becoming religious in those days, to me, was spiritual gluttony. I just wanted more of this wonderful stuff. Anyway, continuing. She becomes blinded, that's the soul becomes blinded, by savoring the delight, and no longer cares for the renunciation and love that the theological virtues demand from her. The soul must, from the very beginning, deny the pleasure taken in such supernatural apprehensions. The soul must take care to pay no attention in all the apprehensions that come to it from above. I think we could substitute feelings, by the way, for apprehensions. The soul must take care to pay no attention to all the feelings that come to it from above. She may only fix her eye on and preserve the feeling of love of God that they cause within her. This is the only purpose for which one may recall a certain image or feeling that called forth such love, in order to move the spirit to love anew. I can't add anything. Continuing. In the discussion which follows, the fundamental rule is set forth. The will may only rejoice in that which serves the honor and glory of God, and we can show God no greater honor than when we serve him in evangelical perfection. Whatever falls outside the bounds of this perfection has neither value nor use for human being. Thus, in order to reach union with God, it is necessary to renounce the desire to find joy in natural or supernatural things. Okay, so not only to renounce the desire to find joy in Ben & Jerry's New York Super Fudge Chunk, but also renounce the desire to find joy in the wonderful warm and gushy feeling that you get after receiving the sacrament, the Blessed Sacrament, the Eucharist. This union is possible only through love, and since the delight, sweetness, and satisfaction that can come to the will are not love, none of the delightful feelings can be an adequate means for union of the will with God. They do not lead the soul out of herself toward God. Rather, they want her to find satisfaction in herself. Okay? The feelings, the supernatural feelings, the consolations, the comforts we get from prayer, they're actually not in God, they're in our souls. They're not unchangeable, unmutable, incomprehensible. They are within ourselves. Because union with God is an act of the soul leaving itself and cleaving to God. If it is attached to these feelings, it's leaving God and cleaving to itself. Back to Edith Stein. They do not lead the soul out of herself towards God. Rather, they want the soul to find satisfaction in itself. The activity of the will, on the other hand, consists of loving God. It directs the soul to Him, raises itself above all things, and loves God above all. When therefore someone is moved toward God by a feeling of sweetness, they are to go beyond this sweet feeling and turn their love to God, who cannot be grasped by means of any feeling. Turning to the feeling would mean for the soul that she turn her love to something that is created. The feeling itself is a created thing. It's not God. Confusing the motivation with the goal. Doing this would be to misuse the will's activity. The soul loves securely and truly in the spirit of faith only when she is in darkness and in emptiness of all that the will can feel and that the intellect can understand. I can't add anything to this. Therefore, it would be very foolish to think that God is failing one because of the lack of spiritual sweetness and delight, or to rejoice, thinking one possesses God because of the presence of this sweetness. This is one of the errors or one of the pitfalls of the charismatic spirituality, is that when the good feelings go away, you think you've lost God. And when the feelings are there, you think you have God. It might be exactly the opposite. It might be when the feelings go away and you're in total dryness that you're moving most forward on the path to union with God, that you actually have God most in your soul. I'll just go back and repeat her sentence there. Therefore, it would be very foolish to think that God is failing one because of the lack of spiritual sweetness and delight, or to rejoice thinking that one possesses God because of the presence of this sweetness. It would be even more foolish were one to seek this sweetness in God and delight in it. For this would mean one is seeking God with a will no longer grounded in the emptiness of faith, but with a will looking for spiritual satisfaction, right? Spiritual gluttony, which is a creature, which is a created thing. Thus God would no longer be loved above all else, for this love means centering all the strength of one's will on Him alone. Okay? We are to focus our will on God. We are to love God above all else. If we are loving the spiritual satisfaction that we get from our relationship with God, we are taking love away from God, who should be the target of all of our love, and placing it on something created, which is the spiritual satisfaction. It would be confusing the motivation for the goal. It would be confusing the means and the end. And if God has brought us to the point where He wants us to grow in union with God, then seeking the spiritual satisfaction is going to be doing the exact opposite. It's going to be moving us away from God and not towards God. Continuing with Edith Stein. Therefore, it is impossible for the will to reach the sweetness and delight of divine union if its appetite is not empty of every particular satisfaction. That is why the psalm says, "Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it." She's getting a little mystical in that last sentence, as though she wasn't mystical in the rest. But when the psalm says, "Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it," she's saying that is an intentional picture of this dark night of the soul. Open wide your mouth means it's completely empty. Your mouth has to be completely empty for God to fill it. Your soul has to be completely detached from everything created, which includes spiritual satisfactions, for God to fill it with Himself, which is not a spiritual satisfaction at all. It's something completely different, because the spiritual satisfaction is a created thing. Everything that's mutable and changeable is not God, because he is immutable and unchangeable. Anyway, there you have Edith Stein's explanation. Of course, her explanation is this whole 350-page book. I just took a few paragraphs out of it and tried to use it as an explanation. However, I do want to end the show soon, so I won't do more readings of Edith Stein. I mean, more of this kind of reading of Edith Stein. Okay, back to her martyrdom. 5 minutes to pack a bag. She had just finished writing the signs of the cross, obviously divine providence. So it's time for her to nail herself to the cross and actually be martyred. Okay, so she's first taken to Amersfoort by truck, where they were very badly treated. And she was taken there. At Amersfoort, there were about 1,000 other Jewish and Catholic Jewish prisoners. The Protestant Jewish prisoners were released because their pastors had not read the sermon, had not preached against what the Nazis were doing to the Jews, but none of the Catholic Jews were released. No matter what strings were pulled, none of them were released. Anyway, and then the next day she was taken to Westerbork. Westerbork was in Holland, but it was like a mini concentration camp. It was really, really a bad place. And in fact, many of the prisoners were paralyzed. I mean, they just were sitting on their bed in a state of shock. So much so that, like, parents weren't even taking care of their children who were screaming and so forth. And Edith Stein and the other religious were running around, taking care of the children, bathing them, brushing their hair, consoling them, seeing that they were fed, and so forth. And let me show some pictures here. So let's see what we have here. I did that. Oh yeah, here was the picture I was going to bring up. That's the new version of the Signs of the Cross, the new edition. So if you see it nowadays, you'll see that edition. There is a copy, by the way, of it's a long story of John of the Cross's drawing of the crucifix. So what do I have here? Okay, so that was that. That was this. That was that. Okay, so Westerbork. Here's a photograph, actually, not of Edith Stein, but of Jews, Catholic Jews, Protestant Jews, being put on trucks and taken to Westerbork. So that's an actual picture of that. And here I have something really neat, which actually I'd better put in my earpiece because I'm going to have to see what's going on here. I have a little film clip of the Jews being deported from Westerbork to Auschwitz, if I'm not mistaken. So I will put that on now. I think it's only a minute or two long. I think it's about 2 minutes long. Oh yeah, now I know what I'm doing. There's a little music in the background because there's a music in the clip. Oh, whoops. But I left the mic on so I can babble. That is obviously an invalid being taken to the train to Auschwitz in that cart. 74 persons in the cattle car. They would count the people and then they would slam the door shut and padlock them or bolt them or whatever. There you see the German Shepherd canine dogs making sure that no one misbehaves. And the German officers, soldiers. And there you see the train departing. Soldiers getting on to accompany it and make sure no one escapes. I made that a very short little extract because it's hard to take. So, okay. However, before that train was taking prisoners from Westerbork, literally, that film was actually from the train station of Westerbork, or the train landing at Westerbork, whatever you call it, going to Auschwitz. Those really were the cattle cars. But when she was at Westerbork, she had a little contact with the outside world. So let me turn to some of that. Okay, first of all, here's what a witness describing her behavior at Westerbork. The influence she exerted by her tranquil bearing and manner were undeniable. It was Edith Stein's complete calm and self-possession that marked her out from the rest of the prisoners. There was a spirit of indescribable misery in the camp. The new prisoners especially suffered from extreme anxiety. Edith Stein went among the women like an angel, comforting, helping, and consoling them. Many of the mothers were on the brink of insanity and sat moaning for days without giving any thought to their children. Edith Stein immediately set about taking care of these little ones. She washed them, combed their hair, and tried to make sure they were fed and cared for. Now, at one point, remember she was there for about a week, men from Echt were allowed to bring her a passage from the convent. And here's what one of them reported. For all her quiet composure, there was a light-hearted happiness in the way she spoke to us. The glow of a saintly Carmelite radiated from her eyes. You could feel the heavenly atmosphere that her faith had created around her. Several times she reminded us to tell Reverend Mother not to worry about her and her sister Rosa. Wherever they were headed, they told us, whatever work they were assigned, prayer would remain their first obligation. She hoped she could offer her suffering for the conversion of atheists, for her fellow Jews, for the Nazi persecutors, and for all who no longer had the love of God in their hearts. Does that remind you of this friend from a few weeks ago? Whoops, yes. Another Auschwitz martyr, St. Maximilian Kolbe, who offered his suffering for the conversion of his Nazi persecutors too. We have to do that too, by the way. Boy, do we have to do that. I said this before, but that's actually the only thing we have to do. The only contract that Jesus gave us, I mean, he gave us other advice and stuff, but he gave us the Our Father. The Our Father has only one contract in it. Contract being an exchange, right? It's got exhortations, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Those are exhortations. But there's one contract. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. Forgive us our trespasses because we've forgiven the trespasses of those who have sinned against us. We don't forgive, he doesn't forgive. Right? The parable of the very wealthy man who forgives a huge debt to somebody who refuses to forgive a very small debt, and then the very wealthy man takes back the forgiveness of his debt and says, I forgave you this $1 trillion debt, and you're not going to forgive a $100 debt to your fellow? Well, you can forget it. You still owe me $1 trillion. That's our situation with God. If there's one thing we have to do, staying out of sin and everything, but there's only one contract that Jesus gave us. There's only one exchange, one conditional exchange that he gave us. I may be overstating this, but who knows? And that is, we have to forgive those who offend against us, who trespass against us. Edith Stein did, Maximilian Kolbe did. Next week, we'll have, I think I'm going to do it on St. Margaret of, I'm drawing a blank. So anyway, some of you know who I mean. Anyway, now a quote from a Dutch official who saw her. The one sister who impressed me immediately, whose warm, glowing smile has never been erased from my memory, despite the disgusting incidents I was forced to witness, is the one whom I think the Vatican may one day canonize. From the moment I met her in the camp at Westerbork, I knew that here was someone truly great. For a couple of days she lived in that hellhole, walking, talking, and praying like a saint, and she really was one. That is the only fitting way to describe this middle-aged woman who struck everyone as so young, who is so whole and honest and genuine. During one conversation she told me, for the moment the world consists of opposites, but in the end none of these contrasts will remain. It will only be the fullness of love. How could it be otherwise? We were created for the fullness of love. When she spoke, it was impossible not to be moved by her humility and conviction. Talking with her was like traveling into another world where for the moment Westerbork ceased to exist. Then I saw her go off to the train with her sister, praying as she went, and smiling a smile of unbroken resolve that accompanied her to Auschwitz. Okay, so she was able to get a letter back to the convent when she was at Westerbork. One of the men from Eck took back a letter from her. This is from her letter. I want to send you my last greetings, my final greetings, and to tell you that I have complete confidence in God and have surrendered myself entirely to his will. Even more, I regard it as a grace and a privilege to be driven along this road under these conditions, a witness to the words of our good fathers and shepherds in Christ. If our sufferings have been increased somewhat, then we have received a double portion of grace, and a glorious crown is being prepared for us in heaven. Rejoice with me. I am going forward unshaken, confidently, and joyfully to testify to Jesus Christ and to bear witness to the truth. We are going as children of our Holy Mother, the Church. We will unite our sufferings with the sufferings of our King, our Savior, and our Bridegroom, sacrificing ourselves for the conversion for the Jews, for those who persecute us, so that all may know the peace of Christ and his kingdom. Join with me in thanking God for this great favor by singing an exultant Magnificat. I butchered that. Join me in thanking God for this great favor by singing an exultant Magnificat. This is what she asked of Mother Superior. And I also have a copy of this letter. It's a typed copy. It's not the original copy here. That she wrote on August 6th from Westerbork. Her feast day is August 9th, right? So it's 3 days before this must have been actually, early tomorrow a transport leaves. Yeah, so this is the day before she left Westerbork. So she was there from August 2nd until August 7th. Dear Mother, a Mother Superior from one of the convents arrived last evening with suitcases for her child and now offers to take some short letters along. Early tomorrow a transport leaves. So I was wrong. It was the Mother Superior who took this letter back to her convent. What is most necessary? Woolen stockings, 2 blankets. For Rosa, all the warm underwear and whatever was in the laundry. For us both, towels and washcloths. Rosa also has no toothbrush, no cross, and no rosary. I would like the next volume of the breviary, and here I highlighted this line. For so far I have been able to pray gloriously. She's in Westerbork, right? She's in this mini concentration camp. For so far I have been able to pray gloriously. Our identity cards, registration cards, and ration cards, she asked for. 1,000 thanks, greetings to all. Your grateful child, Benedicta. So that's the last letter that she sent from Westerbork. And that train that I showed you, I won't inflict that train on you a second time, took her took her to Birkenau. Oh boy, I have a lot more actually. I'm not going to end soon. I'm sorry, I forgot. Never mind. I will end by 3 hours, I'm sure. Anyway, took her to Birkenau. This is the entrance to Birkenau. Now, Birkenau was a sub-camp of... let me actually try to put myself in this picture, if I can. Nope, that's not going to do it. So anyway, I can't do it right now. That's the entrance to Birkenau. Birkenau was a sub-camp to Auschwitz. Auschwitz had dormitories, had barracks, where the prisoners lived until they died. I think that when they come off the train, the commandant said something like, the Jews have the right to live 2 weeks, the priests have a right to live a month, and the rest of you have a right to live 2 months, or something like that. They were basically worked to death, starved to death, tortured to death, beaten to death, and so forth. But they were not exterminated. In other words, they didn't get off the train to be killed. They got off the train to be slave labor and die soon. Birkenau was an extermination camp. There were no barracks for them to stay in. They went straight from the trains to the, they're called ovens, they're not really ovens, to the gas chambers, where they were herded into these gas chambers. I think it was about 170, 200, put in this, small cement enclosed space so that they literally could not fall down. And then poison gas was pumped in through the vents, and they suffocated in the case of a few minutes. And anyway, and they died, but they didn't fall down because they were packed in there like sardines. So other prisoners actually, there were a few prisoners who were allowed to live for a few weeks to do the slave labor of emptying out the gas chambers and moving people into the gas chambers and disposing of the corpses and so forth. But basically, it was off the train, from the platform straight to the gas chambers at Birkenau. And so that's what happened to Edith Stein. So that's how we know that she died on August 9th, because she was put on the train. I'll put myself back on. She was put on the train on the morning of August 7th. It was a 2-day train ride, which was no picnic, by the way, either, to say the least. It was torture to be in those cattle cars with no water, with one bucket for whatever was the 100 people to use as a latrine, and crammed in there with no air. That was horrible. A funny story. Trying the nerve for a funny story. Funny story. I went to Edith Stein's canonization. In another moment, I'll get to her canonization. I went to her canonization, and so I'm on an overnight flight from Boston to Rome. And they give me the seat right across from the lavatory on the airplane, which stank. So I'm sitting there all night, with the smell of the lavatory. And of course, all I could think of was, I'm complaining about this. And Edith Stein was in this cattle car for 48 hours with one bucket to serve as the latrine for whatever it was, 74 people, I guess, because that was the number written on the side, with no air vents. And I'm complaining about being across from the latrine, from the lavatory in the plane. I think that was divine providence, by the way. So anyway, I'll talk about her canonization in a moment. So anyway, but in any case, that's how we know that she died on August 9th, is because the train arrived in Birkenau 2 days later, and she would have gone straight from the train to the gas chamber. So, having introduced her canonization was the high point of my conversion in a lot of ways. It was when I entered into my vocation. Was essentially at her canonization. I mentioned this last show. It was the first time I met any other Catholic Jews, and I met many Catholic Jews because we had come from all over the world. I must have met 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 other Catholic Jews, and I had literally never met any. I connected with the Association of Hebrew Catholics, which is an association of Jews in the church. I met a lot of priests, Catholic priests, who were Jewish converts, including actually the world expert on Our Lady of La Salette, Father Jean Stern. Stern was his last name. He's still a friend of mine. He's still alive. But anyway, he put together the 3-volume collection of documentation on Our Lady of La Salette. He's a La Salette missionary. I met others too. One of the founders, Father Emmanuel, I think his name is, of the, I'm getting really confused, but the founder of either the Beatitudes community or the Emmanuel community, who's a Jew who became a Catholic priest and so forth. Anyway, it was just heaven for me. And I have lots of pictures, blah, blah, blah. This isn't a travelogue. But, we ate meals together. This is a table. You can see me there, a celebratory meal of us after the canonization. And all of the people at the table, if I'm not mistaken, are yes, they're all Jewish converts. The guy at the end of the table with the tie is the head of the Association of Hebrew Catholics, David Moth. The guy next to him, I forgot his name, but actually knew him before and after his entry into the church. And there's me. There's a pushy French Jewish Catholic woman sticking her head in to block me, so she's in the middle of the picture. She reminds me of my sister. She always used to do that when we were kids. There is a Australian Hebrew Catholic. I'm drawing blanks on the names at the head of the table, and so forth and so on. And a Jewish convert priest there. I forgot which one it is there. Anyway, that's what that whole time there, those few, 3 or 4 days at the canonization were like. It was a great celebration. It was a celebration. Edith Stein was our patron saint, right? Because she was a Jew, a completed Jew. We were all completed Jews. I can't believe I don't have this picture. I must have this picture, but I apparently don't have this picture. Anyway, so maybe the show is not supposed to be about me. Okay, so that was that. I'll skip. It's a beautiful story, but I'll skip it because I've been going on. Whoops. Maybe I'm not supposed to skip it. Okay, so I won't skip it. This just popped up. Okay, canonizations require a miracle. The miracle in the case of Edith Stein's canonization happened to this little girl. She was a little girl. She was like 2 years old at the time. She's about 18 at the time of the canonization. Her name is Teresa Benedicta McCarthy. Her father is an Eastern Rite priest named Charlie McCarthy. And here's Charlie McCarthy. That's her father. That's her mother, by the way, behind Father McCarthy's beard. And as I said, here's the girl, Teresa Benedicta. And she is the miracle that was needed for the canonization of Edith Stein. I've been very blessed. I met the girl. I was living in Boston at the time, and she was living in Boston. She used to hang around all the fanatic Catholic events. And I'm going to read, I can't believe I'm doing this because it's going to take forever, but I'm going to read her father's account of the miracle that resulted in the canonization of Edith Stein. Maybe I'll compress it a little bit. Okay. He was the father who is married. He had children. You are allowed to become an Eastern Rite priest if you're married. And he had 10 children. Anyway, he was ordained a Catholic priest in the Melkite Rite on August 9th, 1981. August 9th might sound familiar to some of you. It's the feast day of Edith Stein. It's the day that she died. He had no idea who Edith Stein was. He knew nothing about her, but when he was ordained on Edith 9th, it kind of jumped out at him, and he looked into Edith Stein. And over the next 5 months, he read everything he could find about her. And her depth and her holiness and her sense of truth made such an impression on my wife and me, this is his words now, that we decided to name our new baby girl Teresa Benedicta after Edith Stein, whose Carmelite religious name, of course, was Teresa Benedicta Croce, of the cross. We did this despite the fact that Edith Stein had not even been beatified at the time. Okay, and then on March 20th, 1987, the little girl, Teresa Benedicta, who would have been, I guess, 6 years old at the time, was rushed to the hospital with spasms and a loss of consciousness. 3 hours later, she was diagnosed as having eaten 16 times the toxic amount of Tylenol. She had found a box of Tylenol that had little packets in it that she could easily rip open, and she had thought they were candy. Her medical condition spiraled down dramatically in the hospital. Every piece of news was bad. The look on the doctors' and nurses' faces when they spoke with us told the whole story. They were doing the best they could, but she was losing ground every hour. Finally, they told me that her only hope was a liver transplant, but that even in that case, it would only be a 50-50 chance of success because of the highly toxic dose of Tylenol having destroyed other organs in the body. Because of the severity of the situation, she was put on the top of the liver transplant list, but there were none for her. And then, okay, so late Saturday, March 21st, so the next day, they decided to put all their resources into prayer. The father got everyone he knew to pray for Teresa Benedicta. He had been a very active priest for 20 years, leading a lot of retreats, so he had a long list of people he could ask for prayer. He developed, I'll go back to his words, we started a telephone prayer tree where one person would phone a few people and they in turn would call others. And they called many, many people to pray. Then the next day, March 22nd, he was supposed to leave Boston. I was supposed to begin directing a 3-day retreat for about 80 people in North Dakota. North Dakota was 1,500 miles from Boston. The question was whether to go or not. On the one hand, Teresa Benedicta was dying without any hope. Her condition was worsening by the hour. On the other hand, teaching Christians about the nonviolent Jesus and his nonviolent gospel, which were the theme of the retreat, had been my primary vocation all of my adult life. This is not just another retreat on a spiritual subject. It was a retreat on the truth that 20 years earlier I had discerned that God wanted me to use my life to proclaim to all the churches of Christianity. I was paralyzed as to what to do. A little after midnight, I walked into my bedroom to try to get some sleep after having been up for more than 48 hours. A book was open on the floor by my bed. I picked it up just to put it back on my bookshelf. Just then I looked at the open page, and one sentence jumped out as though it was written in neon letters. Jesus was talking to St. Teresa of Avila, one of the greatest mystics in church history, and the founder of the Discalced Carmelites, the order to which Edith Stein belonged. In a passage that struck my eye, Jesus said to St. Teresa, "You take care of my business, and I'll take care of your business." I had my answer. The decision was made. I'll go to North Dakota to do Jesus' business. At 3:45 a.m., after about 3 hours of sleep, the phone rang. It was the hospital. Teresa Benedicta had taken a serious turn for the worst. The choice whether to go or stay had to be re-examined. After consideration, the choice was again to give the retreat on gospel nonviolence in faith and trust that Jesus would take care of my business if I took care of his. That Sunday morning, I went directly to the airport, knowing that if I had gone to the hospital to see Teresa Benedicta, I would never have left again. The retreat on the nonviolent Jesus began Sunday evening as scheduled. I did not tell the participants what was happening in Boston. Every phone call to Boston was worse than the one before. No good news. I said nothing about the situation to the retreatants. The retreat concluded on Tuesday, March 24th at 1 p.m. North Dakota time, 2 p.m. Boston time. At that point, I told the retreatants what was going on. They were stunned, there were gasps, there was silence, there were sobs, there were prayers. Then 10 months later, at the request of the Carmelite order, I procured from the hospital Teresa Benedicta's medical records. I found out that on March 24th, at 2 p.m. Boston time, 1 p.m. North Dakota time, the doctor wrote on her chart, "The child has made a remarkable recovery." After 9 years of scientific study and investigation, the medical board of the Congregation for the Cause of Saints unanimously voted in February 1997 that there was no scientific explanation for the healing. Dr. Ronald Kleinman of the Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital, who was the physician in charge of Teresa Benedicta's case in March of 1987, said the same thing. There is no scientific explanation for the McCarthy child's recovery. End of story. That was the miracle. There's the miracle girl in the picture. There is her father, who took care of Jesus' business while Jesus took care of his business. The very happy parents. And the, of course, very happy event of the canonization of Edith Stein. Now, I showed this last show, okay, so you guys can turn off and go home. But as I said, being at the canonization was a high point for me. And just to be there and to be in this celebration and be with these other Jewish Catholics. And then when I got home, I'm tempted to say the phone started ringing. It wasn't that. But I used to go to Mass every morning at a convent. And the Sister Superior at the convent, when I got back home and I went to Mass, excitedly grabbed me after Mass and told me what had happened. I had no idea what had happened because, of course, I was at the Mass. I wasn't watching TV. But, of course, the Mass is broadcast live around the world on Catholic television stations. There's one video feed, which is done by the Vatican. They have the cameras, and they give it to all the news shows and all the EWTNs around the world, whoever wants to broadcast. Footage of the canonization comes from this one feed. And Sister Superior was all excited because of what they had seen on that feed. And it takes place literally at the moment that Saint John Paul II elevates the Eucharist and consecrates it. So, forgive me, but here it is.
On the night he was betrayed, he took bread and gave you thanks and praise. He broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body, which will be given up for you."
Well, that was it. That wasn't photoshopped. That's the real thing, the Vatican feed. And I took that as a kind of confirmation that I was on the right track. Let's put it that way. Anyway, so that's that. So thank you for watching. I've had a lot of fun on this show. I thank you so much. I always have fun on the shows, but this show, for some reason, you can tell I went an hour over, or almost an hour over. There's so much. There were readings that I didn't get to in Edith Stein and so forth. You know where to go. If you want me to point you to something I mentioned on the show, I probably should put in the comments the names of the books and so forth. Wow. But that's it. So I think next week's show, I'm not 100% sure. well, anyway, I don't want to tease you, so I won't mention it. But I think I know the saint I'll be doing next week's show on. And I have to say goodbye for now. So I'll say goodbye, and I will close. I'm going to be real mean or really egotistical or something. Remember, these spiritual gifts feed spiritual vainglory. That was the point of the Dark Night of the Soul and of Edith Stein's teaching. So it's a temptation, and it's certainly not a temptation that I'm immune from. So I'm actually going to close the show with a little bit longer clip of the canonization around the consecration of the Eucharist. And then after that, I'll go to the normal closed screen and back to the music by Harpade. That music, by the way, is St. Michael prayer chanted. I think you may have noticed. And the reason why I'm using that music is because St. Michael is the patron saint of the Jewish nation. So I thought it was fitting. I guess we could pray to him too, to help the conversion of the Jews along. Anyway, so with that, it always happens. I hate it when it happens, but it happens. Time to say goodbye, and hope to see you again next week, so to speak. Bye for now.
Father, you are holy indeed, and all creation rightly gives you praise. All life, all holiness comes from you through your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, by the working of the Holy Spirit. From age to age, you gather a people to yourself, so that from east to west, a perfect offering may be made to the glory of your name. And so, Father, we bring you these gifts. We ask you to make them holy by the power of your Spirit. That they may become the body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, at whose command we celebrate this Eucharist. On the night he was betrayed, he took bread and gave you thanks and praise. He broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body, which will be given up for you." When supper was ended, he took the cup. Again, he gave you thanks and praise, gave the cup to his disciples, and said, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant. It will be shed for you and for all, so that sins may be forgiven. Do this in memory of me."
Defende-nos in prelio contra nequitia et insidias diaboli imperet illi Deus, supplices te precamur, tuque princeps, militiae celestis, Satana maliosque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo.